Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project. Today's special guest is Anne Parmer of Celerity, an organisation that specialises in helping organisations with agile transformation. We know that you're going to get a lot out of today's episode. A quick special announcement before we start that we now have a weekly newsletter as part of the Leadership Project movement, and we do encourage you to go ahead and subscribe to this so that we can keep you updated with all that we're doing. In the meantime, please do sit back, enjoy this episode, and don't forget to leave us some feedback or some reviews if you've got any particular questions or topics that you would like us to cover. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Leadership Project, where our vision is to inspire all leaders to challenge the status quo. We're greatly privileged today to be joined by Anne Parmer of Celerity. Celerity is an organisation that helps other companies manage change, in particular looking at things like digital transformation and also putting Agile in practice. We're really greatly honoured to be joined by Anne today, and she's going to share her thoughts about leadership from her own experiences and also how all leaders need to look at things like agile practices and how you can transform your businesses. Anne, thank you so much for your time today. Really looking forward to our chat.
Thanks, Mick. Me too.
And let's start quite casually. Tell us a little bit about yourself and about what led you to this part in your career now.
Sure. So I've got a long and winding career, and I think that that's one of the most interesting parts of it. It's I studied piano performance and English literature as an undergrad and never would have imagined that I would be part of business transformations and technology. Having this broad generalist knowledge really helps me to connect with leaders and to see the potential for change. I think that you know this already, but innovation and new ideas come from connecting lots of different sources and being able to think outside of a box. So worked in marketing for quite some time. I started my first business before I realized that I had. That was kind of a privilege to have people that would give me work. And then I got really curious about the mechanisms of business, how you create value, what it means to lead and manage, how companies can change the world. And then as I evolved, I got super curious about leadership. What is it that makes some people leaders that we want to follow? And so today, Mick, one of the things that I'm really fascinated by is the full range of leadership, all the different dynamics of it, because I think that there is a lot of diversity in leadership that we haven't maybe fully embraced. So that's kind of long story short, not a lot of specifics, but we'll go there, I'm sure.
Yeah, that gets us started, and there's a lot there that we can get into. You already brought up the word diversity, and listening to your own career, you've had a lot of diversity in your own career leading up to this point. How do you think that helps you today?
Well, let me take an example from agriculture. Actually, I don't know if you're familiar with Anne Parmer, the chef, but he has talked a lot about how commodity farming gets everything super consistent and predictable. And I think we saw that in management and leadership, like trying to manage down to predictable results, but then we miss the outcome of what is an amazing flavor. And so in an ecosystem, diversity is what gives us all of these like unexpected combinations and richness in an ecosystem. And I feel that way when I think about leadership. If you Google CEO, especially when my career was starting 10 or 15 years ago, you would get a picture of an older white man, right? And to me, I think that we have kind of missed that there are so many different aspects of leadership. Women bring a different style, people with different experiences, different countries. And one of the questions that I'm really thinking about right now, Mick, is not just diversity that's visibly obvious, but how do we measure diversity of thought? That's I don't know that we have a good answer for that right now.
That's an outstanding question, though, Anne, and I think that's one that we definitely need to explore as a society and as a group of leaders. One of the things that we're looking to do here at the Leadership Project is to challenge the status quo and to embrace these things. And diversity of thought is the exact point. If you keep on just having the same cookie cutter approach, you're never going to get new ideas. And when faced with a problem, whether it be a crisis or, as you said, looking to innovate, if you keep going back to the same sources, you're not going to get that plethora of ideas to actually pick from. So we are absolutely fully with you there, Anne. Tell us about, during that journey, was there a particular moment where you transitioned from being an individual contributor through to a leader? Was there a real moment where you go, oh, I'm a leader now, or I'm moving into a leadership position?
I would say there are a couple. There's an op-ed in the New York Times from a while ago by David Brooks called The Moral Peril of Meritocracy, and it talks about how lives take the shape of two mountains. On the first mountain, we are trying to follow society's rules or climb a ladder or do what seems like what's expected for us, the unstated rules. And then what he says or what he writes is that we're faced by tragedy. For me, that was getting divorced 10 years ago. It was really like an extremely low point in my life. I had to come to terms with mistakes that I had made and really just, it was hard. And then the second mountain, David Brooks writes, is where things get really interesting, because it's on that second mountain that you see people starting to think about lifting others up and giving back to society and the self-actualization side. So I think for me, leadership started to happen by facing kind of like the worst of who I was by this personal tragedy that I had created myself. And I think that there's a response there in terms of like reflection and then dedication to service. So those are some of the lessons that happened along the way for me. As part of that journey, I practiced yoga a lot, meditation, that probably is kind of obvious. And I became a yoga teacher. One of the moments that stood out to me in terms of leadership is I was in front of a room of like 50 people. And I remember like looking out across the room and saying, like, I could tell these people to stand on their head, my students, and they would. And that was one of the moments of like, I don't know if you've ever had something like this where you realize that there's a group of people who have put their trust in you to have their best interests in mind. So that was another moment. And then the last one, I said there were three. I was at lunch with a friend of mine, a man who was a great leader. And he looked across the table. We were talking about leadership. And he's like, Anne, how many followers do you have? And I think I was like, well, maybe a couple thousand on Facebook and a bunch on LinkedIn. And he looked across the table and he's like, no, Anne, how many people would follow you? And so I paused and I thought about my team at work. My direct reports are still great friends to this day. And I know that they would go where I lead. But it, in that moment, really changed what I thought about leadership. It's not necessarily saying we're going over there and asking a bunch of people to trust you, but instead serving them so that they want to go where you are going, if that makes sense.
There's so many things there, and that I'd love to go deeper into. The first one's there around self-reflection. So you've been through a journey there that this is something that I practice every day, which is practicing self-reflection and really thinking at the end of the day, you know, what went well, what didn't go well, what would I do differently next time to get a different result. It sounds like you've been through a big journey with that. Then you also spoke a lot about self-awareness and starting to get to that point of realizing that as a leader, and leadership is not a rank, it's not a title, it's a set of attributes that someone has or doesn't have. It's that ability to inspire people to do things. Now, hopefully they're good things, inspiring them into action that is for a good cause and based around some kind of vision. But it's that ability to influence others into action and doing it because they want to do it, not because you told them to do it. And it sounds like you've been through that exact journey and gotten to that discovery. Getting to that point, what about yourself looking at other leaders? When you look at other leaders, what do you look for in an inspirational leader?
I look first for character, and I think that takes a little while to assess. So another dynamic, I think, of leadership is the way that you handle your time, the things you say yes to and the things that you say no to. I look for leaders who lead from their values, who are smart and curious, and who are open to new ideas. The last time I switched jobs, I think I told you this, because I was looking for a leader that I really wanted to follow. And I found that in the CEO of Celerity. Within our first conversation, he's super interesting. Well, the Black Hawk helicopter pilot has a 30-year consulting career, but his ability to just listen and really hear what someone else is saying and then being open-minded to those ideas is really important. And then the last thing, I thought you might ask this. So I was trying to think, like, who are the leaders that, one, I don't know that gets referenced all that often, might be Richard Feynman. He's a thinker, a philosopher, and a really curious scientist. So I think that one of the values for me that's particularly important in leadership is curiosity. And the flip side of that is humility, because you can't really be curious if you think you already know something. So those are some of the reflections that I have.
That is so true. I love that. I'm going to remember that one. That's a good one. I'm going to look up about Richard as well. I'm not familiar with his work, but you're dead right. There's so many leaders that think they're in that position because they are the smartest person in the room. And therefore, what have you got to teach them? And if you can put that aside and embrace humility, you might actually learn something. And the better leaders in the world are lifelong learners. They're learning something new every day, and they're surrounding themselves with people that they actually can learn and grow from. Something I want to go into now, and you mentioned about Ken and your current CEO, and that you joined that company by the sounds of it because you're inspired by him. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah, and also that their mission really aligned with my own. So I'm one of the people who's lucky enough to know what my purpose is.
Right.
It took some work to find it, but it's to connect smart, strategic people together on projects that matter. And Celerity, part of the vision statement for Celerity is a world based on authentic connection. So there were a bunch of reasons that I kind of made the choice to go where I went, but that was definitely one of them, this idea of really authentically connecting with people, which kind of circles around into something else that I know that we want to talk about, agility, organizational responsiveness. But then the piece of that I think fits here is psychological safety, right? This idea of if you can be authentic and true and self-aware and reflective, those things are essential inside in order to create an external environment where others can show up as their full selves.
I had a feeling this was going to happen with you because we've had some wonderful conversations before we agreed to go ahead with this podcast. I knew that this was going to happen. We're going to go on all kinds of sidetracks here, but we're just going to have to follow it because this is going to be so interesting. So I want to come back to Ken, and if I don't come back to Ken, please remind me to do so. But you just brought up so many great things to unpack. So tell me what authentic connection means to you.
Well, I'll tell you this. Back when I got divorced 10 years ago, I was making, I think, less than $20,000 a year. I took a job that was just the wrong idea. And so I couldn't quantify the value or my worth in the world with the number on my paycheck. And so I decided that kind of currency was the wrong currency by which to measure my life or anyone else's worth. But in the absence of that value system, if dollars weren't the thing that I was looking for, I had to find something else that would fill that need. Like, how would I fill my wallet if I wasn't filling it with dollars? And so I decided that the most precious resource to me was time. There was a story, side note, about a Buddhist monk who looked across the table and said, "How many hours do you have to live?" I think I have about 40 more years to live, hopefully, statistically. And so that gives me 14,000, little more days left. So I'm like, okay, how will I measure value and worth in the world? So time is one. And I really do cherish the time that I spend, alone with myself. But the other piece of that, the other side of that coin, is the time that people are willing to invest in a relationship with me. So I think that those authentic connections are this gift of honesty and transparency and connection in conversation with a community. And for me, so my job is business development. And it's such an honor to get to do this work because I'm paid twice. I'm paid my paycheck, the dollars, but more than that, I'm paid in the ability to spend my days doing the things that I love, which is connecting with people like you.
So good to see someone that cherishes what they do and have found their calling. You've found a company that you work for with a leader who has shared values compared to your own values. You've found that almost like a pursuit of happiness element of not just being satisfied in your job, but really feeling like you got paid twice, which is wonderful. So you're getting to do something that you love and you're getting to take a paycheck home at the end of the day. That's amazing. And I love everything that you said about having an authentic connection. And I do believe that's the fundamental part of being happy in any workplace. It is about achieving that. You mentioned psychological safety. I want to get into that one now. What do you think it means to have a psychological safe environment for people to work in?
I think it means that people can take risks without fear of retribution. It doesn't mean that it's not scary to take a risk, that there isn't some fear inherent in that, but the consequences of taking the risk should be positive in that you're learning or growing from that. Too often I sit in groups or meetings or have where the most powerful person in the room is the one who's ultimately making the decision, and the rest of the group sits back and listens and waits for that voice so that they can affirm it. And I think we miss out on so much richness and diversity of thought, coming back to that, by deferring in that way. We did an exercise in grad school. I'll tell you about this. A group of 4, each person had a piece of paper with a story on it. The story was like a whodunit kind of thing. Great. The team's task was to solve the murder, solve the case. But what wasn't apparent was that each story was slightly different. They looked the same on the page, but what I learned from that exercise is that each person had a key piece of information to solve the puzzle. And if everyone didn't contribute in that conversation, the group would draw the wrong conclusion. So I think now in facilitating groups, I'm really curious about what is the piece of the puzzle that you are holding, especially the silent people in the room. And so there's an art to pulling out and making it safe for people to venture their own thoughts and opinions. How do you do that? By being transparent about your own uncertainty, right? Being open to those ideas, being willing to be, I guess it goes back to humility again, humble enough to say, I don't know, and we'll do this all if we do it better together.
Really interesting, Anne. And I've seen this as well, by the way. So many meetings where you walk away and find that the meeting was just dominated by the strongest personality in the room. Whether they were the most, doesn't matter about level or hierarchy, but just the strongest voice in the room or the strongest personality in the room dominated the conversation. And then you find out later that pieces of the puzzle that were missing because people didn't feel like that they could contribute, or they weren't invited to contribute, or They didn't want to get trampled by that person with the strong personality. So a psychologically safe environment is certainly one where everyone feels like their voice can be heard. Absolutely. And that also plays into inclusion as well. And a lot of people talk about diversity and inclusion at the moment, but it's really important that people stop to realize what it really means and making that environment feel safe, that people do feel included. What I want to maybe springboard from that is about then a blame-free culture or embracing failure. What connection could you make there between a psychologically safe environment and a blame-free culture? What are your thoughts there?
I'm not very familiar with the term blame-free culture, but I really like it. So I'm learning something from you too.
Okay.
I think, though, that, it ties back to Carol Dweck's work around growth mindset, right? A blame-free culture is one in which you see the inherent value. It's not the destination, but it's the journey, the path that took us here and the things that we learned along the way. Those things take so much patience, though. If you're looking for immediate results or transactional value, I think we really miss that. Yeah, blame-free culture. I don't know. I'm going to work with that, though. I'm lucky enough not work in culture that's permeated with those kinds of psychological minefields.
I'll extrapolate a little bit for you then, and we can go through it a little bit more. The concept here is, you've all heard the statement, things like don't shoot the messenger. But to unpack it a little bit more, it's more like the biggest concern that any organisation should ever have is when their most passionate people become quiet. And it's because they feel like the safest thing they can do is keep their head down. And if that's the culture that you've got, that's when you've got a problem. And that's not a psychologically safe environment. That's where I was going with that. But your answer was wonderful, by the way. So it was a great spin on that. So I want to come back to Ken now and your current organisation. You've joined there because of a leader. You've joined there because of a set of a shared vision. I want to twist that to the opposite now. Can you give an example, and you don't have to use names, of course, but you can give an example of a leader that's had the opposite effect on you, someone that was less than inspirational or maybe demotivating. Have you had that in your career?
Yeah, definitely. I've been really lucky to work with the people that I have, but I remember one instance where I was with a boss of mine, and I knew I was ready for a little bit more. I was kind of the office girl. So I was responsible for reconciling the books and setting up marketing campaigns and things like that. But I wanted to move into a client-facing role. And, I thought we would have this heart-to-heart and it would be a great conversation. And we were in the car together. I still remember it. He's like, no, I don't think that you're ready for that. And I remember just kind of feeling like cold water on my face. I didn't pursue the conversation then. And just kind of said, okay, I trust you as the leader. And it turns out I asked him about it a long time later, probably a year or two afterwards. And he was like, oh, no. I didn't mean that you weren't ready for more responsibility. I meant that the job that you were asking to do is one that at the time, he's like, I think it would have compromised some of your values. And that was my first kind of lens into okay, I misinterpreted what he was saying as a critique of myself. I should have asked more questions. But also on the business development side, it kind of forced me or previewed that there are ways that people do this work that are less authentic. And I'm thankful to have had that opportunity to learn there because it gave me a choice to make. What are my values here? And what am I willing to do or not do to get a deal? So I'm glad that all that happened, but it was super demotivating at the time. And I wish that I had a leader who had communicated that in a way that allowed me to grow from it.
Interesting. There are two sides of that story, though. You're testing there about walking away from a conversation and not testing an assumption that you made or drawing your own conclusion as to what the person meant. So that's a self-reflection. But yeah, there's also a lesson there about having clarity in communication and when you're talking to other people to make sure it's really clear what you mean and to test that the other person has understood the intent of what you're saying there. That's really interesting. And you also, now we're going on another tangent about being true to your values. And your values really, this is what builds trust, is being true to your values and beliefs at all times, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of what happens around you. This is what actually builds trust over time. And one of the quickest way to break trust is to show that, you might stand up in front of a crowd and say, this is what I believe in, and then your actions show something else. So bravo to you to staying true to your values. What I'd like to ask, though, is you are in business development, and here is an example where you say that, well, some people do that role in a different way. What can you say about sticking true to your values and beliefs and still being very successful despite maybe the actions of others? What are your thoughts on that?
I see myself as a bit of like the fulcrum in a seesaw, if that makes sense, Mick. And on one side is the client, and on the other side is, in this case, Celerity, the organization that I'm representing. And I want to make sure that those interests are balanced. And I think that means that I think about the difference between like transactional, I'll say transactional leadership, transformational, and transcendent. And in this place as being kind of the fulcrum of that seesaw, I want to make sure that I'm never looking at what's the like short-term gain or looking at it from a transactional lens only. There needs to be an account for value creation and what's in both parties' best interest. If I don't bring great projects to the team, I know the pain of the team coming back and saying, what did you do? Same thing on the client side. So it's got to be a win on both sides of that. And that's how I think about business development.
My perspective of that is if you're not true to your values and you do something just to win the deal, for example, you might win that one deal. You might win that one project, that one contract, but you won't necessarily win a lifetime of business with that other party that's built on trust. And really the lifetime of business built over a long period of time is going to be far more valuable than just having that win that you get or that instant gratification of that one contract or that one project that you win. And really it's those relationships over time that really pay far more interest than just having short-term success. And I really like what you said about balancing the interest between your own organization and also that of the client. Really good. Okay. What do you think are the factors that lead to someone leaving a company then? Because you've been very open that you joined Celerity for specific reasons. What do you think are the factors that do lead to people leaving companies? And people do leave all the time. What do you think is some of those factors that lead to that?
I think that there are two main ones to me. One is a fair exchange of value. I think that sometimes it's easy to not recognize that you need to reconcile what that exchange of value is and make sure that it's, again, balanced on both sides. Another is just growth. If you're looking at the value of the journey or that growth mindset, eventually you're going to evolve as a human and the organization will too. And I've certainly been in many places that I outgrew or the available growth that remained there to be had was marginal compared to going to somewhere else. I think the idea of leaving organizations is a really healthy one. I think a lot about gardening and pruning, and I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing.
It comes back to diversity of experience and diversity of thought. Again, my view on this one is actually relatively binary. It's a little bit almost one or the other one. It's like the difference between being a specialist and a generalist. And there's some people that have developed very great and rewarding careers being a deep specialist in their craft. And then other people have built their career, I think very similar to you, and by doing all kinds of things in their career. Like you said, you've been a musician, you've been in marketing. Oh, Range by David Epstein. There you go, right. Determining whether you're going to be that deep specialist or whether you're going to get a general set of experiences. I lean towards the generalist, but I've got deep respect for those that decide to be a very, very, very deep specialist in their chosen domain. And one of the things that you're talking about there is getting out and maybe changing organizations so that you can grow more and get a different experience. I think that's really interesting, and I think that's good advice for a lot of people to think about. Also, I've been in the situation where people are leaving the organization that I work for and they go with my deep blessing because I know that they're going to exactly do that. They're going to grow and they might even come back one day with a richer experience. And that has happened a number of occasions. You've let someone go on an experience and they've come back to you and they're so much richer when they come back. Have you had that as well, Anne? Have you had people that have yo-yoed back to an organization and come back richer than when they left?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a good reason to not burn bridges, whether you're the one leaving or whether you're the person being left. And again, it's like that value of human connection and relationship. I want those relationships, whether they're between a person and an organization or between individuals, to be able to flourish regardless of the label on them. I want to come back to something that you said earlier about building trust. People do business with those that they know, like, and trust. And I think the part of that too is really important. I've been thinking about this a lot and it sort of seems to fit here. How to create more joy and more fun in an organization. But when I peel back those pieces a little bit, I think underneath all of that is how much am I willing to love and serve others. And so when you're talking about boomerang employees, or if you are operating from a foundation that is rooted in that kind of ethos, there's no harm for someone leaving and no harm for someone coming back, because you know that you're doing it from a place that is really rooted in values and love.
I really love everything you're saying there, and it's so much aligned with my personal values. And I'm going to think about that now. Do I replace know, like, and trust with know, love, and trust? It's a little bit like that. That might be a good segue towards my next set of questions. You and I are not that old, but in our lifetime, we have seen a lot of change in the world. How do you think the face of leadership is changing as the world evolves?
Well, I think I've been thinking so much about automation, AI, technology, and I know that just this pace of change as it continues to go faster. COVID really hastened a digital transformation. Also, what a time of uncertainty and ambiguity. So I think that the face of leadership is one that needs to deal with more uncertainty, faster timelines, and the way that machines can automate and take over much of what we consider work today. For me, that means that, again, leadership needs to rapidly respond, especially to that ambiguity. And now we're kind of hinting towards agile processes. And leaders need to respond with ever more empathy for the humans in the systems. I think that's really difficult because lots of reasons, but one of the main ones is income inequality, at least here in the States. And although I think as a society, we are much better off than at any time in history, we do need to address, maybe almost with a design thinking or art of the possible mindset, as a society, as humans, we could create beautiful lives and opportunities. But it will take some imagination and some restructuring of systems and some real leadership to be able to do that. I guess all that to say, leaders cannot continue to operate on past models of leadership in the midst of everything changing as rapidly as it is. So I hope that leadership evolves to be more inclusive more open-minded. Yeah, less prescriptive.
I think that's really good advice. Open-minded, inclusive, and to get ready for the art of emerging properties and the art of the possible that becomes available because of that digital transformation. That's really interesting. I'm going to dwell on that one a bit myself and really think about that. And now we're getting much kind of deeper in towards what Celerity does, and we'll cover a little bit more of that shortly. What do you think leaders do need to know about digital transformation, particularly, let's say, leaders that have grown up in a more conventional world that didn't have some of the tools and technologies that we have available today? What advice could you give to all leaders about digital transformation?
Two things. One, it won't slow down. So just if it is a lot today, it will be even more tomorrow. And two, finding ways to empower teams, I think, becomes much more important. That goes back to coaching, mentorship, teaching, and training. For an organization, I believe more than ever, the people are the most important resource. You can't optimize for profits over the lives of the people within the organization. And I would add to that the environmental impact. So I look at leaders in companies like Patagonia, for example, that are going through the supply chain to make sure that there's minimal impact to the environment there. Or here in the States, a B Corporation movement, that's a self-certification of a benefit corporation that looks at not just how do we optimize profits, but how do we account for whole lives and whole people. And so I think that leadership needs to continue to move in those directions.
You're covering a few things there all at once. Firstly, you're circling back to values and beliefs. You're also talking there quite clearly, I think, about making sure that your actions as a set of leaders, but also as organizations, match those values and beliefs. But you're also, I think you're touching on the ability to use technology to help create good in the world. So making sure that technology is used for very altruistic purposes. You might make a profit along the way, but make sure that you're doing it for a reason and something that enriches the world. What about the fear factor? Celerity deals a lot with workforces as well. What's your reflection on the fear factor that robots will all take over our jobs and AI replaces everyone and we won't have jobs in the future? What's your take on that?
A couple of things. One, I think that there needs to be transparency and governance built into the way that we build our algorithms and operating instructions for things like AI and machine learning and bots. But on the other hand, I don't know, Mick, if you've experienced this, but I have a conversational AI bot that handles my calendar. And any leader, any of your listeners have gone back and forth to try and schedule a meeting and understand that routine rote tasks like that are not the best use of our time. And so I think that there is this like silver lining to automation in that I would rather do things that are creative and generative than routine. So if we can automate routine tasks and think about how we might use that time we save to learn and to contribute and to give back, I think that's a great place to go. I really want to see us as humans not wasting time on things that are not good uses of our minds.
And that really then unlocks the power of the human brain to actually work on things that can be powerful. And I did use your bot to book the very first meeting you and I had together. And it was a very easy experience. It was very efficient. There was no back and forth all the time. It was really efficient. One of the stats I heard not long back was that 65% of people that are starting school this year will end up doing jobs that don't even exist today. What's your reflection on that?
I think that that is probably accurate. And I think that that means that the way that we interact and the way that we communicate, the way that we connect disparate areas or see overlaps between disciplines, those things, creativity, they become much more important than being able to execute a particular task. So I'm excited by it, really, and just think that we have so much opportunity to create incredible things. I can't wait to see my son's 12, what he does. He wants to be a video game designer. And we were talking about it over dinner the other day. And I'm thinking in the back of my head, yeah, when you enter the workforce, I don't know whether that's even going to be a thing because the speed and pace of technology changing. Like, who knows?
Yeah, and if it's not a thing, it'll be something even more exciting. So embracing change, acknowledging that it's here to stay, and if anything, it's going to accelerate. I think that's the lessons that you're really sharing with our listeners and current and future leaders. I think it's really important. You need to embrace it. I do like what you said about governance as well, though, to make sure that we do ensure that it all goes in the right direction. So I really like that as well.
Yeah. I want to go back to one thing there, which is, I don't know, I think that's about a year ago, I started to really research governance and ethics in tech. And that field still seems like not as well developed as I think it needs to be. How do we regulate technology? How do we tax it? To me, it feels like even hearing the legislature in the United States thinking about monopolies and regulation of big tech, the minds that are responsible for that are not, how do I say this? Okay, let's take it as like a board role, for example. Many times the folks on a board are towards the end of their career. That doesn't mean that their opinions are any less valid. But as technology is emerging even faster, I think that we need to give space for new, different voices that have kind of grown up with that technology or have the expertise to really say, like, this is a way in which we might tax or regulate emerging technology. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I'll share a personal thought on that.
Yeah.
One of the things that I sometimes get worried about, and this is going to be an unfair statement to some data scientists in the world, just to be open about that before I even open my mouth on this, but I do sometimes worry about how the world's best data scientists are working in advertising instead of working on something that fixes something for the greater good. So incredible amount of data science is going into making sure that the advertisements that come up on my smartphone are hyper-targeted towards me. And I don't have a huge problem with that, but I do wish that maybe some of the focus was going on to under other things. So I can see where you're getting at, making sure that any innovation is for a greater good and making sure that innovation is not just done for innovation's sake, that it is actually heading in the right direction. There's something there for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, what about Agile in practice now? And this is a big part of what Celerity does. What can you share with our audience about what it really means to transform your business into an agile business? Because it's a term that many people use, but does everyone understand what that really means?
I want a little disclaimer. I am not the expert in Agile. So if you are, I want to learn from you. But what I see is, and this is coming also from the procurement process, whenever people are looking at something like software development, which is where Agile originated, oftentimes the buyers of technology want to know what they are getting, how much it will cost, and how long it will take, right? It's kind of like building a house, except a house is something that we understand. We have a lot of knowledge about what a house is, the doors and the windows and the walls and the joists. But software isn't like that. And we need to have a way to account for changing circumstance and changing priority. And so an agile development process or an agile mindset says, okay, we're generally going in this direction, but we need to be able to pivot throughout that process. And that requires flexibility and it requires tolerance of ambiguity. And we've kind of talked about that throughout as a facet of leadership. Requires empowering teams to make decisions and then having very clear communication channels. Around that agile development process is also governance. How do we make decisions in the interest of the outcomes that we're trying to achieve?
How do you balance that then? In let's say a publicly listed company. Publicly listed companies generally do 5-year business plans.
Yeah.
Coming up to fiscal year change, people are already starting to think about, show me your business plan for fiscal year 22 to fiscal year 26. 26, right? So 5 years from now, or in fact, it's more than 5 years from now, because we're still 6 months away from the financial year tickover. In an agile world, how can we possibly determine what is going to be 5.5 years from now? But then how do we balance that with the needs of shareholders, the needs of the senior leadership of a business who need some level of projection, certainty, etc.? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I want you to ask this question to everyone, and I want to analyze the data of what the answers are that you get. In fact, do you have a bucket of data that are people's answers to this?
I don't. This is one that we can put into our surveys that we do. I think this is going to be a wonderful question. I'll give my own view, see if this stimulates a little bit. I'm certain that in my business, that there'll be new technology that doesn't exist today that will emerge in that period. So I need to be able to have the flexibility to be able to adapt and pivot towards that. I'll use a silly example. We don't use TikTok at all in our business, but TikTok didn't exist 5 years ago, clearly. Mm-hmm. And look at how many users it has worldwide and how many videos are uploaded to TikTok every day or every minute probably. So things happen at a great speed, and you do need to be able to pivot towards those. But you also need to be able to give your investors some certainty about where you're going. So if you promise financial results or results to your customers, you do need to be able to put some kind of line in the ground, but then to have the agility to be able to work around it.
Yeah, I understand that. One of the things that I do is committee chair for the strategic planning committee for our public media station here. Public media is such an interesting world in which to operate. But I launched the strategic planning process for that group pre-COVID. We almost had the plan done in March of 2020, and it was a 3-year plan. So a little different than your 5-year horizon, but still years out. And then COVID hit, and we checked off almost everything that we had planned to do within a series of months because things were happening so much more quickly. So in the midst of that process, we shifted over to an agile strategic plan, which meant that we put everything into dashboards with KPIs. We know generally where we're going, but we're able to shift it on a much faster basis. I think that overall, the general idea that has governed that may be helpful is to think big, start small, and move fast. And that's something that we say at Celerity too, in terms of budgeting, making sure that you have the ability to think big and invest even in things that you might not know are coming down the line. But then demonstrating those quick wins in small ways and then testing and iterating from there, kind of like a lean startup mindset, has been a really helpful way to think about it. I didn't completely answer your question because I know that you're talking about billions of dollars and budgeting forecasts for shareholders. This is a different situation.
Yeah, but it's a microcosm of the same problem. How do you actually manage that? And all generalizations are unfair, by the way, but some of them are useful. So if you ask a software engineer working in an agile environment, they want to prepare everything in 2-week cycles. And yet the business wants to prepare everything in 5-year cycles. And there's got to be some kind of balance between the two. And I think we can. And I think one of the keys to it, we spoke about this before, is coming back to vision, values, and beliefs. So if you can be completely true to your vision, values, and beliefs, then the two of those things can still coexist. So you can still have a strategic outlook that can be a few years into the future, but then you can make your daily decision based around 2-week cycles or quarterly cycles, etc. I think the two can coexist, but you need to stay true to that vision and true to your North Star or why you're doing what you do.
A good story for that is the Johnson & Johnson Credo. Do you remember this one?
Yeah, I'm familiar with that. Yeah.
The aspirin recall and the cost to the organization, but the absolute commitment to doing what was best and right for the customers there.
There you go.
Unfortunately, that was a reactive situation and not one that they were planning for, I'm sure.
No, but that's right. Having a credo written down that every staff member has. And by the way, in that organisation, every single employee has the right to ask at a meeting, is this consistent with our credo?
Yeah.
There's something about that. And I think that generates very much long-term value for the company and make sure that you stay on course towards the reason and the why. You spoke a lot before about you've discovered your why. Well, it's important for a company to declare what their why is and to stay true to it. And then people buy from people that they know, like, and trust, or know, love, and trust. Yeah.
Underneath that is one more point about empowering employees. I think you see that in the example you just gave, and then in Zappos, was sorry to hear about Tony Hsieh's passing earlier this year and those circumstances. But the idea of Zappos' case study about that extreme focus on customer service and customer value and the lengths to which an employee might be able to go in order to satisfy customers. I think that that's very much at the heart of being a responsive enterprise, is how employees are empowered to either speak up or to respond to the circumstances around them.
Once again, that comes back to psychologically safe environment. We covered that earlier as well, and I think that all goes hand in hand. Okay, and a question we ask pretty much all of our guests. So if you've been listening to the previous podcast, you've probably already heard this question. What advice would you give someone who's an individual contributor today, but is emerging and looking like they're going to take on their first leadership role? What advice would you give them based on your experiences, either lessons learnt, positive and negative? If you were making that transition today, what advice would you give them?
To come back always to what your values are and to serving the people around you. I did read a post that has kind of stuck with me about the year of maximum enthusiasm. I know that sounds kind of funny because you can't be enthusiastic about everything all the time. But there is something in that about wholeheartedness and finding joy in what you're doing. I think often those things are choices. There's a Shakespeare line that says there's nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. And so, you know, a lot of this is like having a relationship with yourself that allows you to acknowledge how you think and what you're feeling and to process that and then to choose with intention the way that you want to move forward. Those are things that I think are helpful, you know, whether you're an individual contributor or a leader.
Actually, you touched on this a few times and I kind of dodged away from it a little bit because we got a podcast episode coming up specifically on this, but I'm going to take a backward step. It's gotten the better of me and I really want to hear your views about this. You've spoken a lot about serving and essentially what I would call servant leadership. What does that mean for you? Because we are going to have a podcast episode completely dedicated to this very soon, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I can't wait to hear your podcast episode because I feel like I have a lot to learn. But I do see really talented leaders as ones that serve their teams, serve their people. And I can see that in practice as the leaders around me ask, like, what can I do to help? How can I remove roadblocks?
Yeah.
They really do their best to make me as a human as wonderful as I could possibly be. And so I look at that example and try to do that for those around me too. Yeah,
brilliant. As a little teaser to what we'll be talking in the episode coming up, borrowing a little bit this one from Google leaders are trained to ask just a handful of questions to their staff. What are you working on at the moment? What help do you need? And do you have any roadblocks? You kind of covered off a little bit of that as you went along. And part of it is that you don't employ people to bring them into your business and tell them what to do. You employ them because they've got specific skill sets or a way of thinking. You're looking for them to enrich your business, not to just do what you tell them to do. And if you're selecting the right people, you just need to empower them so they can get on with things. Much more coming on that topic when we do the upcoming episode specifically on servant leadership. Now that brings us to a close, Anne, but one of the things that we do, once again with every guest, is we like to give you the floor for the last few minutes of the podcast for you to talk about anything you'd like, but most people choose to talk about the company that they work for, and if people want to have more information about what the organisation does, how to get in contact with you, etc. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mick. I really appreciate it. You came to Celerity. This relationship started through a curiosity about Agile transformation. And so Celerity works in 3 specific areas. One is customer centricity. I love that. It's the people and whether they're employees or customers of a business, understanding those journeys. The next is an Agile enterprise. How quickly can you respond to that feedback from the people involved in your business? And the third part is operational excellence, change management work. That also can look like automation or process mapping. And so kind of the point there is, as you're changing things, you need to account for all the circumstances that go into that change. Celerity is about 250 consultants. We're owned by Randstad, the global staffing company. And I really like the people that I work with. So I think that's important to know too. Very smart bunch of folks. Other than that, I think that I've been so fascinated lately with the way the world is changing and with the opportunity to build better, especially after the way that the pandemic has affected us all. So as we see more vaccines on the horizon, and hopefully as it recedes, we have an opportunity to renew connections with community, to see our colleagues again, continue to build really cool things for a better future.
Thank you so much, Anne. So I encourage you all, if you're looking for some advice on how to do digital transformation or how to put Agile in practice, please do get in contact with Celerity. And also, there was a little message in there from Anne as well. If you're looking for a great place to work, it sounds like it would be a good one to look for as well. So Anne, thank you so much for your time today. You've been so gracious and willing to go on a very open and transparent journey with us, shared all kinds of things with us. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much on behalf of myself and all of our audience.
Thank you, Mick.
Hey everyone, you've been listening to The Leadership Project. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you really got something out of this great interview with Anne Parmer of Celerity. In our next episode, we'll be joined by Lisa Nesneski, the author of 7 Mindful Questions. We're also very excited to tell you that we're going to run a competition. 3 lucky listeners will win a free copy of Lisa's book. Please don't forget to hit subscribe on your preferred podcast service so that you are notified every time that we do release a new episode. And we do encourage you to subscribe to our new newsletter for the Leadership Project so that we can keep you updated with all of the things that are going on with the movement. Please do stay safe out there, look out for each other, and always remember to challenge the status quo.